In light of the current drama surrounding East Asia's favorite long-running family feud, the capabilities of both mainland China and Taiwan are indeed cause for speculation. With pundits hurriedly doing a cursory scan of a Wikipedia article before airing their segments on live TV, the depth and breadth of the Taiwan-Strait conflict is often lost on the viewer and is casually summarized as China big, Taiwan small, followed by the obligatory cheer for the underdog. Such hasty conclusions spare the viewer from understanding why the second largest superpower would potentially embark on an invasion that would be at minimum 3 times larger than the D-Day landings, whilst also risking turning the ancient motherland into a nuclear ash heap.
Here, don't talk crazy. You want to commit suicide, pills are a lot easier.
When the actions of leaders, even of the most despotic kind, are solely simplified as crazy, people are robbed of the opportunity to exercise critical thinking about the sorely nuanced world that we live in. And that is exactly what the current Taiwan-China dispute is, sorely nuanced. This video is about a reason for the conflict that has never been discussed before, and it starts with this. Taiwan is not a weakling, and although currently the scale of power has tipped considerably towards the mainland Chinese side, in truth, this small island has posed the greatest existential threat to the continuation of the Communist Party's rule of China since its birth up until the present day. Strap yourselves in. Unlike the imperial nations of the old world order, the post-World War II era hasn't had a single major power that seriously desired to invade and subjugate mainland China. The old great enemies of the century of humiliation had been forced to scuttle back to their home countries for one reason or another. The sun was finally setting on the Great British Empire and they no longer posed a serious threat. The imposing Russian bear had become their older big brother and benefactor. Japan had been crushed and confined to its island home once more. Even the French had been given the boot by the locals of Indochina, and the Germans had long since left the continent after World War I. It would on the surface appear that the dream of national revival envisioned by the founding fathers of the nation could finally be realized. But with all their enemies diminished, there was one final threat that remained, and that was itself. When the Communists ousted the Nationalists from China proper in 1949, the Nationalists retained the islands off the coast of Fujian and Zhejiang. And these islands in question were not far away like Taiwan was, but a technically swimming distance from the mainland. Although driven off the mainland, the Nationalists were not defeated. They had a navy, aircraft, a large standing army, they were financially solvent, had international trade relations and powerful allies, and most importantly, this long-standing enemy was uncomfortably close to the mainland. Kinmen Island is about 5 kilometers away from Xiamen, the Matsu Islands about 10 kilometers away from the mainland, and Daqing about 20 kilometers from Taizhou. These islands and a number of others were comfortably controlled by the Nationalists, and they were far from being a small nuance to the victorious Communists. Whilst it is a well-known trope that China sees Taiwan as a rebellious province that must be brought to heel, it is also true that Taiwan too sees China as a rebellious province that must be brought to heel, at least until very recently in history. What people don't know is that the Communists had always been terrified that the Nationalists would try reinvade the mainland if the opportunity presented itself. Such a dynamic is clearly displayed in the confusing semantics of their names. Just like how Holland is mistook for being the Netherlands, so too is Taiwan confused for being the country's real name, China, aka the Republic of China. The same Republic of China that ruled the mainland from 1911 to 1949. This is in contrast to the current rulers of the mainland, the People's Republic of China. Naturally, a shorthand would be created for these respective nations by the international community to make things simpler, China and Taiwan, with the two nations making it their core obsession to claim all the real estate of the other. Conflict would of course be natural. During the formative period of cross-strait conflict that occurred when the Nationalists fled to Taiwan, the civil war remained ongoing, only that the war had transferred from the land to the sea. The Nationalists, who had the upper hand in navy and aircraft, implemented a blockade of the Chinese coastline, not allowing any commercial vessels past the island chain. The effect was the total prevention of China's entry into international commercial trade, with the only trade existing with the Soviet Union over land routes. And with the Sino-Soviet split that happened in 1962, China became hermetically contained forcefully within its own borders. As long as Taiwan controlled these offshore islands, all port activity on the coast simply could not function. China was not ignorant of the effects of being blocked off from commercial trade, and the moment the nationalists were kicked off the mainland, the quest to get them off the islands they inhabited started, with the first attempted invasion of Kinmen Island in 1949. As a land-based army that specialized in guerrilla tactics, amphibious operations for the PLA was beyond their ken, and their repurposed fishing vessels and undertrained naval units were no match for the nationalist Navy, Air Force, and bunkered down troops on the island, leading to a loss of 10,000 PLA soldiers. Plans to retake the island were resumed only a year later, but with the outbreak of the Korean War, the communists were forced to delay its invasion plans and transferred a bulk of its would-be landing force to the Korean front. If they couldn't bring the battle to the Taiwanese in 1950, the Taiwanese and Kinmen would sally out to the mainland to bring the battle to them in support of their American allies in Korea. Although the attack was a tactical failure for the Nationalists, it forced the PLA to split its forces and played no small role in the eventual signing of the armistice on the Korean peninsula. The concerns of nationalist reconquista was compounded by the budding friendship of America and its new Cold War ally in Taiwan, as seen with their cooperation during the Korean War and the ongoing naval blockade, which was in fact a sanctioned trade embargo by the US with the Taiwanese acting as proxy. With the Korean peninsula pacified, the attention of the PLA came back to Taiwan with the objective of driving a wedge between US-Taiwan relations. Luckily for the Chinese, geography was on their side. The islands they were willing to shed blood for were a swimming distance away from their sovereign territory, and it was theorized the Americans would not intervene in such an obscure part of the world with no strategic advantage to them, leaving the Taiwanese to defend themselves. With the Taiwanese having sacrificed soldiers for the sake of the Americans, it was thought that US ambivalence would surely strain relations between the two if the US didn't come to defend Taiwan's outer-held islands. What became known as the First Taiwan Strait Crisis began in 1953 with the buildup of Taiwanese troops on Kinmen Island of an additional 58,000 soldiers and 15,000 on Matsu. In the fog of war, the Chinese saw this buildup as the long-awaited nationalist reinvasion, starting with Fujian province. Announced by Zhou Enlai, it was at this time that the communists made the public declaration that taking Taiwan would be the focal point of China's national security. Buoyed by troops returning from the Korean front, China would start shelling the Kinmen Islands once again in preparation for an invasion of their own, as well as following up with airstrikes and naval attacks on the nationalist-controlled Dacian Islands, with their much-improved Soviet hardware. This time, the PLA was successful, and they were able to wrest control of the Dacians from the nationalists. Unfortunately for them, their attempt to drive a wedge between the Americans and the Nationalists failed. Although the Americans didn't wish to directly aid in the defense of Dacian, leading to its surrender, they did arrive with a huge show of force just to rescue the stranded military and civilian population of Dacian and ferry them to safety. To make it clear just where America stood, they showed up to Dacian Islands, a mere 10 kilometers off the coast of China, with 70 warships and 7 aircraft carriers. This force would then be used to protect Taiwanese maritime traffic during the attempted invasion of Kinmen, and over time the invasion bogged down to a standstill and the PLA were forced to retreat empty-handed. Whilst it can be said that the PLA enjoyed its first naval conquest, the costs were dear. Not only had their enemies been drawn closer, the conflict was a cause for consternation for its senior partner, the Soviet Union, who worrying that such provocations increased the chance of conflict with the US forced the Chinese to stand down. 750,000 PLA soldiers were now stationed across the Taiwan Strait, but the blockade of China remained strong. Taiwanese Navy patrols from their base in Kinmen and Matsu sunk Chinese vessels wherever they found them. There was something much deadlier that Taiwan had up its sleeve though. The bulk of the conflict between the nationalists and the communists since 1949 up until the present day was espionage and ideological subversion. The ideological subversion of communists is a well-understood phenomena, but what's less understood is the cloak and dagger techniques employed by the nationalists against the communists. Using Kinmen and Matsu as their base of operations, Taiwan let loose the Triads. The whole topic of Triads deserves its own video, of which you can watch it here if you haven't seen it yet. But the Triads are a complex, loosely decentralized group of secret societies. The word triad is used in English as an umbrella term and often misrepresents what these organizations truly are. Whilst I don't personally feel comfortable using the word triad as it's a misrepresentation, there are no better words in English to use. When one thinks of triad, they think of the word mafia, but Asian. While somewhat analogous to the mafia, not all triad organizations are criminal operations, but all of them are hyper-nationalistic secret societies, many of them having taken a sworn oath to restore the long-deceased Ming dynasty. In the era of the Republic though, allegiance to the Ming dynasty had waned, and the allegiance of loyalty was very typically for the Chinese nationalist movement. There were many factions though. There were Triads who had aligned themselves with the Japanese during the Japanese occupation. There are Triads that have aligned themselves with the communists. There are also Triads that are just common street thugs. And there's also Triads that act as fraternal organizations, like motorcycle clubs. What they all shared in common though was a blood oath of strict secrecy about whatever activities they were involved in, die-hard loyalty to their group, and often they were the progenitors of ancient Chinese mystery school teachings that were long lost to the modern era. At the time of the first Taiwan Strait crisis, triad organizations were highly active, militarized, occupied high positions of power, and had a global reach all around the world. Being kingpins in organized crime, they were perfect units for cloak and dagger operations and were regularly utilized in Asia by American and British intelligence agencies, and not least of all, the Nationalists. Before I continue on with the Taiwan Strait crisis, we need to examine the influence of the Triads on the Kuomintang and their integration as an offensive fifth column against their political opponents, the Communists. The KMT as a political entity is the outward physical manifestation of a secret organization called the Revived China Society, founded in Honolulu by Father of the Nation Sun Yat-sen. All the founding members, including Sun and their very generous benefactors, were part of the Triad that was the precursor for almost all the other triads in existence, and that was the Heaven and Earth Society that was originally founded by Ming loyalists in the 17th century, whose sole mission was to overthrow the Qing and restore the Ming dynasty. With these roots, cooperation with triad organizations was standard, as they typically had shared beliefs, shared social circles, and above all, a shared mission. The first most notable implementation of the Triads in the Republican era was when the largest opium cartel in China, the Green Gang Triad, was employed by Chiang Kai-shek to help purge the communists in 1927. It was this surprise attack by ununiformed paramilitary along with Chiang's own soldiers that aided in the massacre of up to 10,000 communists and sparked the 2 decades-long civil war. Now that you understand the importance and integration of the Triads within the KMT, we can go back to 1950. The Nationalist, General Cott, of the anti-communist National Salvation Army would create a new triad in Hong Kong, known as 14K. 14K is as of current second largest triad in the world with 20,000 members, and is an international crime syndicate that specializes in human and drug trafficking, along with many other illegal activities. However, at the time of its inception, it was a patriotic organization whose purpose was the recruitment of clandestine intelligence agents, along with conventional soldiers, to be ready to push back and reoccupy the mainland when Taiwan launched its counter-invasion. Through Kinmen and Matsu, agents were deployed to connect with triad organizations in the mainland for intelligence gathering, recruitment, and espionage, as well as infiltration into the PLA and the Communist Party itself. On home soil, 14K members were used to disrupt subversive communist activities in Hong Kong and Taiwan to contain the spread of communism within the Sinosphere. Although today it's unthinkable that a small island nation like Taiwan could have or would have invaded China, the speculation that the communists had about Taiwan wanting to invade Fujian in 1953, as I mentioned earlier, ultimately proved to be true. According to Martin Perbick, 30-year veteran of the Hong Kong Colonial Police Force, working in counterterrorism intelligence, wrote, quote, General Cott was Director General of the Anti-Communist National Salvation Army in Guangdong, Guangxi, and Hunan provinces, and his recruitment of thousands of new members of the Hung Fat Shan branch, that's 14K Triad, was part of the nationalist efforts to create a guerrilla army ready to support the invasion of the mainland by their military forces from Taiwan. The nationalist military used what seemed to be questionable numbers when lobbying the US government in 1953 for air, naval, and logistical support for the proposed plan for a counterattack on the mainland, claiming that they were in contact with 650,000 anti-communist guerrillas, which US officials believed was more likely to be around 70,000. It was likely that the number of secret society members recruited by General Cott, now part of the 14K, were counted by the nationalist government as guerrillas, as part of the efforts to convince the US government of the levels of support for the nationalists in mainland China. Nationalist operations involving these guerrillas continued into the 1960s and involved escorting secret agents into inland China, organizing resistance, sending ammunition and supplies to mainland guerrillas, destroying communist military installations along the coast, supporting the people in resistance to communism, collecting military information, and carrying out psychological warfare." End quote. However, just like the Communists in 1953 with their aborted attempt to invade Taiwanese territory, the Nationalists too were prevented from reinvading the mainland when the Americans refused to back their invasion plan. In addition, the 14K leader, General Cott, suddenly died, leaving the approximately 500,000 strong 14K Triad members disorganized and leaderless. Despite the attempt to bring the 14K Triad back under nationalist control, a citywide crackdown on the Triads by Hong Kong police prevented many of the key leaders from traveling to Taiwan to carry out their missions. The 14K had sparked a violent clash with communist sympathizers in the city, leading to a riot that resulted in the deaths of 4 innocent civilians. This disruption of the peace lost whatever public support they had, and as such, they became treated as common criminals henceforth. With the loss of their leader and the inability to carry out their core mission, the patriotic origins of the 14K would gradually be lost, and over the decades to come, they would sink deeper into the world of organized crime until that's all they became known for. Understanding the existential threat of weaponized triad organizations, the Communist Party implemented the Campaign to Suppress Counter-Revolutionaries in 1950 to ruthlessly cull anyone suspected of being affiliated with the KMT-linked secret societies who carried on guerrilla campaigns across South China. Long before even the Nationalists came to power, the entire country had been honeycombed with these hyper-nationalistic triad organizations whose sole purpose was to plot the downfall of the Qing dynasty. These groups were entrenched into local society and were a severe cause of paranoia for Mao, who on the 21st of January 1951 wrote in a telegram to party members in Shanghai, quote, "In a big city like Shanghai, probably it will take 1 to 2,000 executions during this year to solve the problem. In the spring, 3 to 500 executions will be needed to suppress the enemy's arrogance and enhance the people's morale," end quote. Perhaps not forgetting the massacre of his comrades in 1927 at the hands of the Green Gang Triads in Shanghai, the opium trade came to a halt and the powerful Green Gang Triad were forced to flee the communists' wrath. Of course, the trouble with pinning down individuals who've taken a blood oath of secrecy and are used to living life in the underground is that frequently they evade authorities whilst bewildered civilians would be taken in their stead. The definition of counter-revolutionary would then be stretched out to class enemies, such as landlords, who were then treated with the same punishment meant for people committing acts of espionage. With Taiwan acting as the base for these cloak and dagger operations in the mainland, as well as being the point of operations for large naval blockades of the coastline, and being responsible for bringing the world's preeminent superpower to its front door, the goal remained crystal clear for the communists: to pacify Taiwan. On August 23, 1958, with even more amphibious assault craft from the Soviets and better training, the Communists tried their luck once again with a surprise assault on the Kinmens, igniting the Second Taiwan Strait crisis. Whilst it's true that Taiwan punched well above its weight, there was no doubt how much larger and stronger the PLA army was by this time, and the only thing preventing China from doing its favored strategy of swarming their enemy with human wave attacks was fear of Taiwan's powerful ally, America. Although the Nationalists were the enemy they were fighting, the focus for Mao once again was testing America's resolve. However, in 1958, Washington committed to action that would have been unthinkable today. In show of support to Taiwan, an armada of the American Navy's 7th Fleet arrived at the scene of battle with 4 aircraft carriers, a formidable host of cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and unlike last time, the fleet was armed with tactical nukes, in anticipation of a human wave attack on Kinmen. This dramatically upped the stakes in a way that had never been witnessed before, with US Secretary of State Christian Herter referring to it as the first serious nuclear crisis. This had shocked their Soviet allies who, although having armed the PLA, thought they made it clear to the communists in 1953 to act with caution in the Taiwan Strait, lest it provoke a wider conflict with the US. At this stage though, in 1958, Mao was indignant towards the Soviets for deconstructing Stalin's cult of personality in Russia. While still reaping the benefits of the Soviet alliance, he no longer took directives from Moscow like he once did, and thus acted recklessly, infuriating his ally. The conflict continued to escalate towards a major crisis as the Nationalists had won air control flying their American-made F-86 Sabres, and in retaliation for the shelling of Kinmen, Chiang Kai-shek drew up plans for targeted airstrikes on the mainland. With confusion certain to arise from seeing American aircraft bombing mainland China, there was potential for the situation to get nuclear. On September 19, 1958, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev sent a letter to Washington warning that the American intervention threatened world war, claiming that the Soviet Union would be forced to honor its commitments to the territorial integrity of Communist China. Washington rejected the Soviet appeal, and so the Soviets very sternly advised the Chinese against continuing this operation. Finally, on October 6, 1958, China announced a unilateral ceasefire. Not one to lose face though, in spite of a second failed invasion of Kinmen, the PLA would shell the island every few days for the next 20 years. The attempted invasion was a tactical failure for the communists and had severe repercussions. Just like in 1953, the attack had only pushed the Americans and Taiwanese closer together and brought the Taiwanese under the Americans' nuclear umbrella. In addition, America had buffed up Chiang Kai-shek's once backwards military force and turned them into a professional, modern-day army equipped with state-of-the-art jets and weapons. On the diplomatic front, America had given Taiwan a powerful seat at the United Nations, whilst the economy boomed owing to it being a Marshall Plan recipient. Unlike the budding romance between Taiwan and America, China's relationship with its own benefactor was on the rocks. China's reckless actions endangered the Soviet Union and was certainly a factor in the Sino-Soviet split. Despite the conflict in the Strait, for a period, the Soviets would replace Taiwan as the biggest threat to China, and once again the troops in the south were sent north to deal with the new threat. Such times have long been forgotten to history, and certainly much has changed since then. Since the 1991 constitutional amendments in Taiwan, the once Kuomintang-dominated Taiwan government no longer considered themselves as the sole legitimate government of China, indicating that increasingly over the generations, citizens were identifying more with their island nation than the long-lost land of their forefathers. As such, the army has been solely focused on defense rather than offense in recent decades. Furthermore, while secret society elements within the PLA and communists are still integral to Taiwanese intelligence, the Nationalists certainly no longer have a monopoly on triad organizations. Most triad organizations have grown lethargic in the 21st century and are unlikely to exert the influence they once had, but the communists have gained control over many powerful triad factions of their own. For instance, there are the triad gangsters that help them launder money through gambling in Macau. There are also the triads that work with the Hong Kong police force to help them beat up protesters in 2019, and most recently, they were used to defend banks during the currently occurring bank runs. In fact, the only non-communist political party allowed to participate in China's National People's Congress is a triad organization called the Zhigong Party, who most likely retained their influence owing to its long-running ties to the international cabal of triad organizations across the world. Although Taiwan is not seen as the threat it once was, its close alliance to the liberal world order still brings the threat of America and its allies to Taiwanese territory, which happens to still only be 10 kilometers away from the Chinese mainland. And even though it's unthinkable and requires the imagination on the behalf of a paranoid leader, Kinmen can still be used as a staging point for invasion in the event of a war with the US, as well as being used once again as the belt buckle for a potential naval blockade that could send China into the Stone Age. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to support this channel, check out the sponsor for this video, ExpressVPN. Whether you're trying to hide your information from communists or triads, ExpressVPN can help you retain your anonymity when browsing online. Out of 12 VPNs I use when in China, ExpressVPN is the only one that works well. I personally contacted the team at ExpressVPN because I wouldn't feel right promoting some of the other services who look like they work fine in Europe or Australia but fall short once it's been battle tested by China's firewall. If you like this video, please show some love and leave a like. And if you want to be a part of this channel's rise to the top, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you don't miss out. See you in the next video, guys. Peace.
Take